Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Canadian Premier League Newsroom podcast. I'm Kristian Jack, coming to you from the nation's capital in Ottawa, where Benedict and I are about an hour or so removed from TD Place Stadium on Sunday and Saturday. We're also there as we witness two great games in 2 days here in Ottawa. We'll get to the CPL leg of the week soon, but we must start with the celebration tour as the Canadian women's team destroyed New Zealand 5-1. The gold medals returned to be showcased in front of the Canadian nation as well. We're all here to talk about this. Let's start with a quick question off the top, rapid fire. One thing that made you smile the most from that game? Emily, you're our correspondent. I'll let you answer that one first.
Oh, that's a good one, Kristian. I'll say the opening, I'm going to call it an opening ceremony. Just, having every player that was there, bar Julia Grosso and Ashley Lawrence, but just to have them each kind of get their own little individual moment. Yep. That was nice. Nice way to kick off the game.
Benedict was there, high-fiving all the fans as a paid ticket member. Your favorite moment of the match, my friend?
Yeah, I heard someone around me say they wanted to be Kadisha Buchanan when they grew up, and I thought that's an important thing. It sort of talks about the legacy of what this gold medal is going to do, and I thought that was a special moment.
That's great. And anybody who hasn't read it, please do. Benedict's great piece on CanPL.ca about what it's like to be in the crowd, and a real sense of inspiration coming from it. So many people inspired by these ladies and wanting to be that. Something that they've obviously accomplished. Charlie, what about you? What made you smile?
Obviously all the sentimental stuff and the occasion of it, but I think the biggest smile I had was that Canada's first goal was a Jesse Fleming penalty. It just felt really perfect after, considering what we were celebrating.
It did. They won through on penalties. They got to the final on penalties, and they started off with a penalty.
Jesse Fleming scored a lot of penalties.
They have, and as I mentioned, it's good that they got someone who can score them, right? And as I mentioned in my piece, at one moment, I did think for 1 second that maybe Christine Sinclair was going to take it as she reached for the ball.
Should have.
And then I thought, nah. That's how ridiculous was that thought? Because she was never going to steal the spotlight. That's just not what she wants to do. Marty, you're smiling, and on that thought, what made you smile the most on the match?
Those gold numbers. Nice. Beautiful. Nice little touch. I loved it. As soon as they walked out, it's like, that's perfect. That's perfect. Something to remember by, right?
Yeah, definitely. Really good idea. And they kept that pretty quiet as well. They kept a lot of things quiet. Obviously, the ceremony at the start, and obviously coming together. Lots of different things have been written about that, but the reason why they want to do that and start to make a change on and off the pitch, just as Janine Becky told me last week in Beyond the Pitch, where it really is more than just about being players on the pitch with this group of people, the group of women, and I say group of people because the backroom staff who were there as well. Great to see so many of them honored as well yesterday in that moment as well. Let's start with this game as we do a deep dive into the matches, and we'll get into the big matches in the Canadian Premier League in a minute, starting with that game in Ottawa today. But Emily, you are our correspondent. What did you really write about the most? What did you focus on? What really left the biggest impression on the pitch once they started kicking the ball for you?
I think the scoreline. We talked about the Jesse Fleming penalty already, and I remember I was writing the match analysis, and in the moment I was like, is this going to be another one of those situations where they get by from the spot? The second goal we know was from open play, but it was off a mistake from New Zealand's part. So, Sinclair made it 2-0. And I was still kind of like, I wonder if they can finally click in and score from open play. Because I did some math, and I think it was like 330 minutes, if I'm correct, where They had not, just because as we said before, shootout against Brazil, the penalty against USA, and then the shootout against Sweden, and the Fleming penalty also in the gold medal, and then another penalty. So I was like, I really want to see if their attack can start clicking. And eventually we did, as we saw in the second half, and it's something that Priestman and Sinclair spoke about. They're making sure that that's a big focus, getting more goals in the back of the net, not from the spot. And it worked out. It was nice to see them clicking in the attack. And I think their defense was on point as well. It's something that isn't touched upon as much, I think, when you have someone like Christine Sinclair and Janine Becky and the like. So I think their defense was on point. The attack, obviously 5-1, pretty well done. And just an overall a really well-rounded performance is how I'll sum it up.
Yeah, it's a really good way to sum it up, I think, Emily. I'll be honest, I was thinking about the game as I was walking there after it took me about 45 minutes to find a place to park my car, but that's a whole new story that you don't need to be bored about.
Is that was mentioned in your...
It was mentioned there, and
you're right up. Yeah, I was like, it's weird to talk about a parking spot.
Never try to drive there.
Bank Street.
Benedict had it all down to a T, dropped off like a legend at the gate, and picked up like the legend he is as well. My point being is, when I was walking there, I was thinking about the whole match itself, where Bev Priestman talks about the 5 goals after Emily mentioned, but these games, these celebration moments, very often you think that the match really didn't matter. And it had that feeling initially, but then the game starts, and sometimes I'm thinking New Zealand could really get into this game, because Canada, it might be a game not thing, but as soon as the whistle started, you thought, Emily, I think, back to you, you just knew Canada were in this to play a game as well. It wasn't just showing up with gold medals and waving to the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that was discussed kind of in the post-match press conferences as well. Priestman really emphasized that, sure, it's a friendly, and of course, we're going to make sure that it's a celebratory event, but, Canada's really focused on building after this gold medal. The World Cup's up next. It's coming around very quickly. 2023 is not far away, so they want to take it one step further, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep up this momentum throughout the entire tour. So we'll see how Tuesday goes.
And goal scoring important, right? Because obviously, as you mentioned, Janine Becky was very good, and Bev Priestman talked about the need to get goals. Benedict, as I said, you were there. I know you had a blast and a great write-up, but what was your take about overall Canada on the pitch once the game started, their performance?
Yeah, I already kind of touched on it. Just the ability to finish their chances, I think, is something this team hasn't had. We saw that during the Olympics. We saw that before the Olympics as well, the She Believes Cup. And we kind of, this team hasn't always been able to score the goals when they make the chances, but Adriana Leon's a great finisher, and she scored a couple of tidy finishes as well, and Christine Sinclair's goal, of course, and just the ability to sort of take advantage of their opportunities. I think it's something that Bev Priestman's wanted and spoken about recently, and now she's finally getting that.
Just great to see them play at home, no? I mean, Charlie, I can see you nodding along. Your overall thoughts watching it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think maybe one of the biggest themes around this whole celebration tour is, I might have even said this last week when we were talking about it. It's momentum, right? Not just, off the pitch where you're trying to capture this moment where they're in the news and everybody's heroes, but it's also on the pitch, because I think as several of you have already mentioned, they're still looking at that World Cup, right? And I think even coming out of that Olympic, they won a gold medal, but I think even they would say that they hadn't hit their best. I think they have another gear, and there are things that they are on the pitch as well looking to improve on. So I think it kind of all fits together. It's all about momentum and continuing to build towards this, and not really, winning the gold medal and kind of resting on your laurels at all. So I think it is really nice to see.
And again, Marty, it cannot just be about them playing far away. No, a little bit like what we talked about with Alphonso Davies coming back and having that moment in front of this Canadian team, Canadian fans for the Canadian team. Sinclair had that moment. They need those moments in front of these fans.
I may just flip that back to Benedict, because you're bang on. Like when Sinclair came out, then obviously the Fleming goal, like, I'll flip it to Benedict. How was that there? Because watching it at home, it was such a powerful moment for people that have followed this team for so long, but I couldn't imagine how cathartic even it would feel there, right?
Yeah, I mentioned this in my story, but the atmosphere there is when Christine Sinclair's name was called, even during warm-ups, an hour before the game, Christine Sinclair was running out of the tunnel, and the cheer was already deafening, and then it happens again when they announced the lineup, and she comes out last of all the players coming out, and they're counting down the players like number by number, and then they skip 12, and we kind of thought, okay, here we go.
Really?
And then she comes out last, and it's just this incredible roar coming out of the stands, and it's like, I said in my piece, it felt 20 years in the making, and 300 appearances in the making, and it was absolutely, the goal was just the cherry on top, I think.
Like Hulk Hogan coming out in Royal Rumble, like that. Just like it was great that players had that moment. Like I kind of mentioned it in my piece. Like Benedict talked about it. It was not just about everybody coming out, shaking hands, lining up for the anthem. Like they individually walked them out one by one, and everybody got to embrace it. Everybody got to cheer, right? I'm not going to name the ones that aren't at the top of the mind of people, but even the depth players who got the medals, who played a role in it, and we all know everyone plays a role in the tournament. It's not just about playing on the pitch. They got their moment, their moment to be cheered on by the fans coming home in the first game since 2019. So that was really special as well. Emily, you mentioned the press conferences. What was it like to sit back and listen to Christine Sinclair? Because she is obviously somebody who doesn't want to talk about herself ever. So how was that?
It was really good. We weren't sure exactly which player was going to come out after Priestman. We waited a little bit, and then Canada Soccer said it's going to be Christine Sinclair, and I was like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. I mean, I've personally never interviewed her before, so it was just great to hear her speak. She spoke about multiple topics too. There were a few questions about the NWSL, just the team vibe, but it's just, she's such a leader. And you can see just through like the way that she speaks and the way that she talks about everything. And like you said, Kristian, she doesn't make sure that everything's about herself. You know, she was really talking about how even individually in the squad, it's just everyone has really stepped up. This is her words. Everyone really stepped up. And she even said, even at their club level. So, you know, she's always keeping her eye on her teammates, what they're doing across the pond in the NWSL, who knows. But yeah, she's just such a wise player, such a leader. And it was just great to hear her talk about that experience, talk about that moment, and then talk about the future of the team, all kind of in the same 20-minute period.
No, that's great. Certainly caught my attention. You use the word wise. I think that's a really good one. You know, just watching her live again, and obviously I've had the opportunity to do that, you know, multiple times in the past. But quite honestly, when the pandemic hit, never thought didn't know it would ever happen. You know, you know, it's 38. You know, we don't know how long it's going to carry on, but wise is a really good way to describe the intuition that she has on the pitch. She just has unbelievable sense of when things are going to happen before they do. I just did the supreme reader of the game and getting into space. So yeah, great. It was just a terrific day, and it continues on Tuesday night. If you still wanted to go see them, go Montreal. And by the way, I think it's pretty on the record to say that this is not the end of this celebration tour. There will be more games to come, I believe, even in this year. So keep an eye on that for more announcements to come soon, as Canada wants to say, you know, celebrate more across this great country with this great team. Talking about this great country, this Canadian Premier League is getting really exciting. We're getting down to the nitty gritty, and we'll stay in Ottawa as we recap the weekend's games, and we'll go from back to front. Atlético Ottawa won, York United won. Benedict and I were there for that game, and Charlie, I know you were covering it. So Charlie, I'll start with you. How did Atlético Ottawa not win this one?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really great question. They certainly don't know. I think they had 21 shots. I can't imagine. I can't think of a game where they would have had more than that in one game, because they came out of the gates in this game carving York apart. Yeah. For at least the first like half hour of this game. Just York would maybe try and build up slowly. They'd give the ball away, and Atletico would be like fired out of a cannon. They'd be down the pitch. Ryan Telfer was really good in that first half with just these driving runs forward. Antoine Coupland, I think we're going to talk about him specifically a little bit after, but oh my goodness, that's an incredible game from him, who's 17 years old, playing in front of, I think he said he had like 40 to 50 of his family in the stands there to watch him play, which is definitely a special moment for him to score, I think, his second professional goal for the club in front of all them. It's really, really, it felt like a day after about had half an hour of that game. It felt like this is going to be Ottawa's day. York are going to be really, really upset with how they've come out of this game, because it's obviously there's a lot more tangibly on the line for York, who are in a playoff race, and Ottawa are not. But Ottawa, in their final home game of the season, came out like a shot, and you know it just so happened to end up that, you know, they conceded on the second phase of a set piece with a very good cross, maybe some sketchy marking. I think they got pulled out by the second phase. They thought they were going to clear the ball. But honestly, other than maybe 10, 15 minutes of this game, it was all Ottawa.
Yeah, it certainly was. Those who missed it ended 1-1. Antoine Coupland in the 15th. Christopher Ensa with a header, bullet of a header in the 10 minutes before time. From a great cross by Noah Verhoeven on a bright, it was very bright, by the way, very good, and an otherwise pretty dismal York performance. You know, Verhoeven and Ingham, probably the best two players on the pitch for York United that day. Ottawa will probably not get any more headlines around this game, and, you know, one game to go. It obviously already out the playoffs. What can we think about this team in terms of how they build from this? Benedict, maybe I'll turn to you and get back more from Charlie on this. So you could say same old Ottawa, right? I did the numbers. 13 of their last 19 games post-bubble and scored one goal or less. I know some people we were talking to, Benedict, today, and with members of the staff, almost said it was a microcosm of the season, you know, playing well, not scoring, conceding a goal again. But Benedict, you've covered this team as well over the last month or so. Since they've gone to a back five, they've won 2, drawn 2, and lost 1, outscoring the opposition 8-7. So they have made inroads into significant improvements. We watched them closely again today in that back five. It seems to suit them. So this is going to be something, Benedict, surely that they can build on. And maybe this back five might be something that Mista and the team can build on for 2022.
Yeah, I definitely think they should. I think it brings out the best of Zachary Verhoeven, especially. I think when he gets the ball down the right side, we saw him against Max Ferrari. Was a fantastic battle down the left/right side. I think the back five is definitely the way to go. It gives them a bit more defensive stability in the center of the defense as well, especially when you have Drew Becky there, which they didn't have today, unfortunately. But when he's there, that's a very solid back line, and Brandon John as well. And he gets the best out of Miguel Acosta and Zachary Verhoeven on the 2 wings. I think that back five is probably the way to go going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned it. No Becky, no John. Obviously, Viti Martinez has not been there for a while either, so they're still trying to build this around. I guess last word on this, Charlie, before we get to York, is can Ottawa really look at this as being an encouraging end to a season where I think the hopes were certainly higher. They did move above Edmonton, so they're off the bottom initially. But is there something that they can significantly build around going forward in a year they have to build, right?
Yeah. I think there is definitely a lot here to work with. Even just the fact that they came out and they put in an effort like that despite being mathematically eliminated. Right. If you're a coach and you know that your season has been really quite challenging for you and it's been very frustrating and you're eliminated quite early on in the going with a playoff race still raging, you could just kind of fold and maybe throw some young guys out there to see what happens, whatever. But no, Ottawa is clearly, they wanted the result today, absolutely, and they are clearly still playing for things. Well, they've got one more game left, but obviously I think we've said it before, players are playing for jobs, and I think Mista is going to have quite a lot from this game in particular. I think you can learn quite a bit about what is working, what isn't. I agree absolutely about the back five. I think that has worked really well recently. Ryan Telfer finally this season is starting to look as good as we know he can be. Actually, that is probably the case for a lot of these players. But Ottawa's season has been a funny one. I mean, the depth is maybe a problem for them and has been all year, but that's not really why you lose one or fail to win one game. It's really, really sometimes hard to put your finger on. And I'm not sure what exactly this club will look like next year. I mean, I think they have a few players on loan here, so we don't know if they're going to be back. But they are an interesting club, and there are a lot of good things to like about how they play football. And you think some of the results could have gone either way this season, and we could be talking a completely different story.
Marty, I'll turn to you on this one. One of the reasons why we as a collective group, our team, try to get to many games as possible, and I know we've been to many now, is you just see different things in a game, right, than you do when you're watching online. And some players you can really impress you in a way. Coupon today, and I know he got man of the match and was impressive by the broadcasters as well, but when you're there and we talked earlier about maybe having 40 family and friends. This was a player that got more than just his family and friends up off their seats. This was a player when he got substituted, he came off on the opposite side and walked all the way around the pitch. And just as he was walking back to the bench, everybody was like standing up, and the game was carrying on, and everyone was giving him a round of applause, which I thought was great. Marty is 17. This is what we want to see in our league, is it not? This was pretty special to see Mista give him a chance to shine and him deliver in a moment like that.
And a player, of course, who debuted with the Fury, I believe, when he was 15.
Right.
I think it was 15. Yeah. He is growing into a lot in this season. We're talking about that back five sort of setup, and Coupland's been called to play a role in that midfield, and he's done quite well. I think today was his best performance of them all, but he's slowly growing into something. And I guess next year he's 18, which would be maybe he's only going to get better from here once he gets that 18-year-old point. He's going to be an important player for Ottawa going forward for sure.
So what of York? Charlie, in your analysis afterwards, you got to speak to Jim Brennan, who said, quote, "For the first 45 minutes, it was terrible. It wasn't us. We were slow. We were sluggish. We were second to every ball. It took us about 60-odd minutes to get going. At halftime, we were disappointed. We knew that the players did. At halftime, we could easily go in there and start yelling and screaming, but I knew what they're going through. They're fatigued. It was a long trip up. It's a lot of games. And what we've asked of them, it was about just finding that second wind and getting something out of this game and start pushing forward. Interesting tactic. Can't really argue with them on that. But let me go around here a little bit and ask you guys if there's any disagreements. I'll start with you, Emily. Which one of these tells you more about York than the other? A team that has lost 2 of their last 16, a team that has drawn 9 of the last 14, or a team that has won 3 of the last 14? All facts. Which one tells you the most about them?
I think I'll go with the stat on the draws. Was it, you said 9 out of 14 there, if I'm correct? Yeah. To me, that just says they're always in it. They're always in the mix, which is true because we can see where they sit in the table. But they're not quite clinching it as in whoever they're playing. They could have the lead and then they could concede or they have to fight back. But they're still always in the mix. So that would be what I would take away.
No, I think that's the accurate one. I mean, Jim Brennan has been called the draw specialist of the Canadian Premier League by many people I've spoken to. Charlie, again, back to you as my correspondent on this. What do you think of those 3 stats? Do you agree with Emily? And what do you think of York in this game?
Yeah, I think the one that probably describes them best is drawing 9 out of 14. But I think if they miss the playoffs, the one that we might look at is winning 3 of 14, especially how many times they've been in winning positions. Certainly not today, but they've been in winning positions. A few weeks ago, they were in the driver's seat for that 4th playoff spot. I think they had about 3 points between them and Halifax at one point, and they've sort of slipped it a little bit. But yeah, Jimmy Brennan was quite candid about his team after this game. For a coach to say that his guys were terrible for a full half of the match is not necessarily common, and he's right. They were terrible for that first half, especially for a team with their season on the line, with 4 games left, and now their last 3 games are 2 against Forge, 1 against Pacific. So we did speak about this game being a must win, and they really just did not come out in the first half with the kind of energy that they needed. Now, that said, they were better in the second half. Maybe not as much better as they wanted to be or as they needed to be, but they're good enough to score, get a result out of the game. I think especially around maybe the 65-minute mark when they made a few more substitutions. When Sebastian Gutierrez came off after coming on about half an hour into the game, which was apparently purely tactical, but a very strange thing to see. But he came on for Lowell Wright. They went with 2 strikers with him and Julian Ulbricht, and it worked a little bit better. There was more energy on the pitch from York. There was that little bit of fight that you kind of want to see from a team that's on the ropes and trying to make a playoff push here with very little time left in the season. So that was encouraging. It's very good to see them respond. And, it's interesting to see Jimmy Brennan say that, we didn't really talk to them at halftime because we figured that they knew. These players knew that, the first half wasn't good enough. So they kind of just left it up to the players to respond to that. And I think in some ways and to an extent they did. And they definitely got a draw out of the game, which puts them in a better position than if they had just lost on the road to Ottawa kind of lifelessly. So, there is something to take from that heading into some really difficult games.
Yeah, the 2 biggest words I take from Jimmy Brennan's quote is they're fatigued, because that's what they look like. They look like a team that has run its race, and also, there's still laps to go, and they don't know whether they can keep going. Sorry, carry on.
It's just worth noting also in this game that York were without some of their biggest minutes eaters.
I was going to get to that.
Diadine Absey was suspended, who I think is their minutes leader. Jordan Wilson was out, who is 3rd on the team in minutes, and Isaiah Johnston's serving his 2nd of the suspension. I think he's 5th on the team in minutes or something like that. So that doesn't help.
No, lots of key players out. Obviously Thompson too. So lots of players not there. But you mentioned it. Pacific away this weekend, Forge at home the following weekend, and Forge at home November 9th wraps up the season. Because of Forge's rearranged fixtures, they do play 1 game at the end that Halifax will be completed. And I think the job has to be that York have to stay in it. They have to have a chance to get into the playoffs on that November 9th night when Halifax are wrapped up. That needs to be the chance. Although it has to be said that Halifax can bury them as early as this weekend. If Halifax are able to win this week at Valor and at Forge. If York lose next week against Pacific, then they're done. if that happens to be the case. Here's Halifax's schedule: 1 point ahead with 3 to play. Valor away midweek, Forge away next weekend, finishing with Ottawa at home on November 7th. Marty, you're our guy on Halifax. It was, well, what should we say, a typical rainy day in Halifax.
Yes.
We haven't seen many of these already. And I thought you had a really good way of surmising it on your analysis, so let's do it here on the show. 0-0 ended against a fatigued Forge team who came back from Costa Rica. Glass half empty or half full for Halifax on a soggy day at the Wanderers Grounds. Your thoughts?
Excuse the water pun there. I think I put that. I think I put that in the article. I was like, I'm sorry, everybody. I had to go there.
That's fine.
That I think it's obviously the York result today changes that looking back now, even though it was 24 hours ago. But for me on that day, I still think it was glass half full for the Wanderers. It's another game where they, this time it was Forge. They ran Forge down, same as they did against Cavalry. They didn't concede against Forge. Overall, a good, very sturdy defensive performance. But this is a team that has not scored a goal. If you don't count an own goal by Abdou Samaki against Pacific in 4 games.
Yeah.
That's the real counterpoint to this, because as you already mentioned in this run in, Kristian, Valor away, that looks like a winnable game to me, but then it's Forge away and then Ottawa at home. And, at this point, they're going to need a couple wins. They need to start scoring some goals.
Yeah. I mean, boy, oh boy.
It was without Joel Morelli, we should mention. Yeah, he's not there.
And Morelli's still hurt. And by all accounts, and I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I think from what I'm hearing, it'd be a bit of a surprise to see him start these away games.
Yeah.
Valor this week and Forge. All eyes on Ottawa at home at the end.
Yeah.
Here's how valuable Joel Morelli's been for Halifax this season. He's scored in 8 games this season, and they've got 17 points from those 8 games. 17 points from 17 games when he doesn't. So they're ineffectively averaging over 2 points per game when Morelli scores and 1 point per game when he doesn't. That's how different they are. He's worth 1 point per game every time he scores a goal to them. It's wild, yeah. I guess it's the true definition of a most valuable player. But they're gonna need him here, no doubt about it, because they, in many ways, York have let Halifax hang around, but York's dismal run over the last few games, as we mentioned, has allowed Halifax to stick around as well, because as you mentioned, Halifax not scoring either. Other than that, what other observations did you take from this, Marty? Particularly, I think Santos was very good in the game. He gets the nod in our team of the week this week, by the way. And Halifax at least kept the clean sheet. When you're not scoring, they need to be solid at the back, and they've been very good defensively lately.
Thinking about rewatching the game and writing down each time a player fell over because it was so wet, just looked like a slip and slide out there. Don't see that very often at that level. So I think that really did affect things. And you saw teams just trying to, again, flick the ball over the top, very much like Halifax did against York in that 3-3 game, actually. Just try to flick it up, try to get it in the air rather than on the ground. Eric Santos was great shifting over to left in a back 4. I think that was done by Stephen Hart to get another body up in the midfield to see if they could try to push on. But still, as it has been really in this season, it's been the players out wide that have been successful for the Wanderers. It was Jeremy Gagnon-Lapare on the left this game, and then it was Maury Donor who was playing advanced on the right. Yeah. And they were really they were performing quite well. But again, it's like, Sam Salter, I like him as a player, but him and Kamara, there's some question marks there about whether or not that was, really going to get you the result. Alex Marshall comes in and performed quite well and made some magic. And again, it just comes down to whether or not they're going to score with or without Morelli at this point.
Yeah. So what a Forge, Benedict, let me turn to you. I think at the moment, what they're living in may well be something that they reflect on more in the future and say that past was, how did we do it? Right. Because we're asking, we're seeing them go to Costa Rica, playing a massive game in the CONCACAF League, come back, go to Halifax, come back, play in the Canadian Championship semifinal against CF Montreal, carry on playing again next week in the Canadian Premier League with a big game at home. So it's this is a team that is built to have depth, Benedict. But when they play a game like this, we shouldn't be surprised if it doesn't go their way.
Yeah, you can't win every game as much as they think they can, as they want to, of course, as well. And they're playing 3, technically 4 competitions at the moment, and we can't expect them to win every game and be at 100% in every game. And a 0-0 draw against Halifax, it's not 3 points, but it's still a point in the middle of a very busy schedule, and I think they'll be pretty happy with it, I think, in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of the changes they do, making, on the fly. I thought Metusala looks really good again.
Yeah.
Just raises to another level when he plays centre back. He pushed Kristian further forward. That was really interesting to watch. Charlie, final word on this from you before I get to Emily with Cavalry Pacific. But I know you were on the game midweek with Costa Rica as well.
Yeah.
This is a team that didn't play that bad in Costa Rica either, but still a lot on the line here for a team that many people would still say are the favourites to win it all in the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah, it's really absurd when you think about it. I think it didn't actually hit me until earlier this week just how this schedule is going to look. As you already broke it down, Costa Rica, Halifax, back home to play an MLS team, and then you're back into the CPL and the CONCACAF League again. It is absurd, really.
Yeah.
And, for them to come through it as well as they are doing and as well as they have done, obviously the Costa Rica game was tough, losing 4-1 against a team that was very good. And
3-1. Yeah.
3-1. Sorry, I got so many numbers everywhere.
That's okay. Lots of games going on. You're right.
3-1. So yeah, 3-1. But yeah, this is a Forge team that is never very down on themselves. They're never very high on themselves. They always go into every game just being like, we've got a plan. We're very calm about it. We've had a plan in the back of our minds for this game, probably for a while now, for each consecutive CPL game. They're always thinking ahead. And I think that they're definitely going to be happy with a draw on the road at Halifax, because it was in many cases a matter of, getting in there, doing what you can, getting the result, hopefully no real injuries or anything come out of it, and you move on to play Montreal. And, I think for the most part, I think they'll be reasonably okay with this.
And that's really going to be the impact of this game, right? Chris Nanko came up, Johnny Grant as well. Dom Samuel picked up a yellow. He's going to be suspended for the next game. I know I wrote this on the website, but Bobby Smirniotis not exactly happy with losing players at this point in the season, which is entirely understandable.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. 41 points from 23 games for Forge, third. Only 3 back of Cavalry with 2 games in hand. Only 1 point back of Pacific with 2 games in hand as well. What a remarkable story developing in Hamilton, Ontario. If they're somehow able to get, despite all of their scheduling challenges, a home playoff game, that is a truly remarkable year for them. And then, by the way, look out when that's the only sole focus that they'll have. Let's move on to the final game that we're going to cover this week on the show. That took place early in the week on Thursday night, a top-of-the-table clash in Calgary at Spruce Meadows as Cavalry beat Pacific by 2-1. 2 set-piece goals, one from a header from Dan Klump and one a barnstorming free kick from David Norman Jr., one of the candidates for the goal of the season so far. Emily, is it fair to say that even though the scoreline was only 2-1, that it was a lot more dominant for the home team?
Oh, absolutely. I think we talked about this on the last podcast, but again, it was another CPL thriller for me.
Yes, love it. The goals coming in for
every time.
Yeah, every time. I think we're 4 for 4. But yeah, Cavalry, I mean, they just came into their house, obviously, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do. I know when I spoke to both coaches beforehand, they mentioned that this match, because they know each other so well, it's going to come down to mistakes. And unfortunately for Pacific, that's kind of what happened. But that was just a fortress. Cavalry we're at home. They're now unbeaten at home still, out of the 8 games that they've played in Calgary. So it's just been incredible. Definitely one-way traffic. Sean Young got the goal for Pacific, we know, but it wasn't enough for the leaders at the moments, but now they've been overtaken by the Cavs. So definitely a thriller. It was a tight one, but I think it was still, pretty dominant from the hosts.
We'll get into Pacific. I want to get all your opinions on them in a second, if it's an over-exaggeration or if it's just a little bit of fatigue at the wrong end of the season for them as well. But Emily, who else impresses you for Cavalry in this team? Because Klump gets a lot of the glory. Yao's been magnificent as well for them, just unbelievably good at the back. But overall, what's your thoughts on some of their players and as they head into what's been, again, 2 more home games down the stretch, Valor at home, coming in for them as well before they finish with Pacific away and Forge away?
Yeah, the one for me was Ben Fisk. I think he's been an incredible addition for Tommy Wilton Jr.'s side. And, Cavalry, they have a lot of power on the wings with Fisk and Mo Farsi, but a lot of the game was going through Fisk's side of the field. Just constantly a threat. And even though he didn't get on the score sheet, he had a hand in mostly like every single time that they went forward. He was always just popping up, and I was kind of sitting there watching like, oh, like there he is again. Like he's really going through it I think he played the full 90, if I'm correct. But yeah, incredible game from him. He was the standout for me. There are a couple other names, but I think, yeah, he's just been a great addition for the side.
Yeah, good shout. He was your man of the match. Gets a nod in the Gatorade Team of the Week coming up this week as well. What I like about Fisk is that he's direct, and he's very, very good on the ball as well. But Charlie, let me turn to you a little bit. There are some intricacies about this Cavalry team that can, and this is certainly not a criticism, that can work out in their favor a lot of times, but they do have a tendency to overplay. Do they not? And Fisk can really bring that driving force that I think can help Mason going forward.
Yeah, Cavalry are kind of a funny team at times because they'll look very different from game to game sometimes. I know, Kristian, you were just saying that they're overplaying a little bit, and they do have an element of that sometimes when they're kind of trying to score golazos sometimes when maybe the best thing to do is to just, run forward. And we know that they've got players that can do that, right? Mo Farsi is exceptional when he plays direct and just runs up the wing. But just sometimes they do have that bit of an inefficient element. I know we've used that word in the past to describe them. They seem to be improving a little in that regard. But overall, just this win for Cavalry, I think they really needed that. Not just because the game before was that 0-0 with Halifax, which was really frustrating and can't believe they didn't win that game, but also because just playing against Pacific specifically, they've had some trouble this year, right? I think Pacific has had the better of them at least twice, and I think there was a 0-0 draw as well. So against a team that, very possibly, almost probably going to see in the playoffs, arguably, hopefully, they'll see in the playoffs, because that would be a lot of fun. But it's good that they finally found a way to play against them and to score goals against them, because they were pretty ineffective against them, I think, the last 3 times these two teams met.
Yeah, knocked out in the cup at home by them as well.
4 times, yeah.
As you alluded to. So,
yeah.
So what of Pacific? Winners of 2 of their last 8, unquestionably in the most difficult run in the Canadian Premier League of the season so far. Maybe at the wrong time. Maybe they needed this to wake them up. We know that obviously it can be a long season. Emily, you talked to him after the match. Pa-Modou Kah said, quote, "I think we didn't start right away. We gave away a very cheap goal on set plays, which we're not very happy with." Quote continued, "We gave away a cheap free kick that led to our second goal. And after that, we were trying to push forward. We'll go back to the drawing board and just learn from our mistakes and move on. We're still going to trust our process, and we're still going to learn from the things that we can do better." 2 goals from set pieces he won't be happy with. It should be noted, though, that in chasing the game, they brought on Sean Young, who was very good coming on, and they put Hajabrapor back in centre defence to try and get more ball players, and he was the one who actually pulled down Joe Mason that led to the David Norman free kick. So although it gave away a free kick, it was by design that Cavalry led to really the problems that Pacific had there as well. Are we concerned about Pacific? I have to ask Mr. Pacific himself, Mr. Thompson. What do you think?
Me? Oh, yeah. Because I picked them. I am not concerned, because I think this is a team that you kind of already were reading it there with trying to read through Pa-Modou Kah's quote. This is a team that that is very much made in his ilk, and he's we've had players go there like Manny Aparicio, for example, that are drawn to his kind of leadership. I think at this point it's about just trying to steady the ship and trying to go through this rough patch and see if they can come out the other side. They're not going to do anything different. They're Pacific. They're going to keep just doing themselves. And I believe that they're going to come out with it on the other side. Okay. But I am Mr. Pacific after all. So.
You're allowed to be positive, and I will agree with your positivity, but I'll say this. What a big week ahead. No?
Yes.
Edmonton at home.
Yeah.
York at home. This time next week, when we're talking about this podcast, we'll be feeling very differently about them, either positively or negatively, right? Because this time next week, we'll have a very good, clear idea whether they're going to be playing a home playoff game. Yeah. And this team needs to play a home playoff game. And there's lots of reasons for it, of course, because they want to win. Also, after rewarding a season where they've played so well and been top for the most of it, they need a home playoff game. They need to reinvigorate that crowd going again, because they want to have another moment like that, a big home playoff game as well. So they need to get 6 points probably out of the next 2 games. Yeah. Benedict, let me turn to you a little bit to turn this around. And if they were able to get to 48 with 1 to play, I think they're going to think maybe that might be a little bit too much for Forge to catch us up with all these games going. They need to win these games, no?
Yeah, I think obviously they need the home playoff game, as you said, but also a little bit of a confidence boost against to show the other teams they mean business as well. He said they've had a bit of a tough patch in the mind games of beating two teams, especially one of the teams in the hunt for a playoff game in York. I think to beat those two would prove they mean business, and especially to get Marco Bustos going, of course, as well. That just adds another element to them. And I think 6 points is going to be the expectation and also the goal for them for sure.
And they have more than one eye on the TFC game as well, which comes
Yeah.
right after that. We mentioned it last week on the show. It should be said, Bustos came on, and there was the fearsome foursome there. There was a sighting with Bustos on the pitch alongside the front three of Hurd, Diaz, and Campbell. And actually, they were at their best, I thought, when they were on the pitch. Obviously, they're chasing a game, so you can't really evaluate the game from a solo from that point on. But they were the quotes I read. Overall, though, what were the emotions like, Emily, from Pa-Modou Kah? Was he as level-headed as he often was, not panicking too much? What did you think of him after the match?
Yeah, I think he was obviously very disappointed just with the result, obviously. But yeah, I think level-headed is a good way to put it, Kristian. He wasn't too overly emotional about the result. He wasn't lashing out or anything or calling anybody out specifically. So I think he's just going to take this, kind of analyze it, settle in. The two games at home coming up are going to be massive. They're very good at home, as we know. And then they have Cavalry again away. So it's going to be interesting to see if the same thing happens, or depending on how the home games go first, are they going to be able to flip the tie back in their favor? Because going into that match, this all-time series was split down the middle, just looking at CPL games. Right. So if Pacific win the next one, then it's level again. And that'll be a really, really big boost for them late in the season if they can get a win away at Cavalry. But you know what? I think he's just going to approach it very level-headed, like you said.
Charlie, last thought from you on Pacific. Is it not getting to the time now where Pa-Modou Kah has to try and find what is his best team? Because there's still so many players, particularly in that front six, that can play in different roles.
Yeah, it's interesting because they haven't really had their best 11 players fit at the same time really many times this season. And, they've still been on the top of the table for a lot of it. So it's interesting. There isn't a whole lot of time to experiment is probably the problem for Pa-Modou Kah and the Pacific guys. At this point, it's the result first, and, figuring out the style or your performance, that has to be secondary at this point. As much as you, as a coach, you'll always talk about, you want to see the performance. You want to see your team do things right from the training pitch that, you've been working on. But at this point, I think you have to go with the players that are in form. You have to go with the players that have been delivering recently. And there's really not a lot of time to play around with things that haven't been working. Pacific have been fairly consistent with their formations and the style of play that they've had at times this year, which is another good thing, especially for a team that's had players coming in and out of the 11. So that'll be a benefit for them down the stretch here. But yeah, I think Marty said it earlier, Pacific are Pacific, and that's something that Pa-Modou Kah says a lot in almost every. Or we are who we are. We know who we are.
But it's true though. There's something to it, right?
It's a turn of phrase that is used a lot sometimes, but it is true for Pacific. They have a clear identity, and they're not really going to be able to stray from it if they really do intend on getting this home playoff game and making some noise in those playoffs. What
is truly brilliant for us neutrals who cover the league is that Cavalry, Pacific, Forge could finish 1, 2, or 3 in any order still. And that's what's so exciting with 3 weeks left and a lot of the season left to go. And I know Forge have got more games to play, but we couldn't have asked for more, by the way, with that and another race between Halifax and York. Throw in Valor? Probably not, although Phil DeSantos will tell us we must throw them in until they are completely out of it. Valor 6th in the table, 28 points, 125, 6 points back of Halifax, 5 points back of York, with all three teams with 3 games to play. Here's what's to come this week. Valor at home to Halifax in a seriously must-win game at IG Field on Tuesday night at 8:30 Eastern Time. Pacific against Edmonton is the doubleheader that night, the same night the Canadians play, the Canadian women's team. 10:30 p.m. Eastern in a massive game for Pacific at Starlight Stadium out west. On Wednesday, the Canadian Championship semi-final. Forge take on CF Montreal of Major League Soccer at Tim Hortons Field. That should be a fantastic game, and we'll have more coverage around that this week. Lots of coverage on CanPL.ca coming up, including live shows this week. And on Saturday, 3 games, a triple header of Canadian Premier League action. It starts again in Hamilton at Tim Hortons Field. Forge versus Halifax. Cavalry take on Valor, and then the come-on match of the week is the nightcap Pacific against York. Certainly not a nightcap out west, a 3 o'clock game Eastern there. Before we wrap up, team, tell me a game aside from the CanChamp game that you're looking forward to in the Canadian Premier League, and then we'll give it a bit of CanChamp love at the end. Benedict, the game you're looking forward to the most this week?
Yeah, I think in terms of narrative and storylines, it has to be Valor and Halifax. I think it's a chance for Halifax to maybe put the nail in the coffin for Valor, but also put a lot of pressure on York as well. And again, I keep saying the word show they mean business, but I think a win against Valor would definitely do that, and kind of major implications on the rest of the season.
Certainly would put enormous pressure on York as well, knowing Halifax play twice before York play again. Charlie? Yeah,
I'm going to go with that last Pacific and York game on Saturday afternoon. That's going to be a lot of fun. Both teams with a lot on the line. Both teams are basically going to be like, we have to win this game. It's going to be fun. And you, Emily, what do you think?
I have to agree with Charlie. There's a lot on the line for both teams, and there's a lot to lose for both teams too. So it's going to be interesting. I think I focus it more on that point. Who's going to lose the most, I guess.
Marty, I know you're not a follower, so I don't expect you to go with that one. What do you think?
I'm going to go with Forge and Halifax on the Saturday, because Halifax will have beaten Valor at midweek, and then they'll go on to Hamilton and win again.
There we go. Wow, love it.
All right, I'm writing that down.
Predictions as well. That's Marty gives
it's not distant predictions. Yeah, why not?
Why not?
I feel good. I feel good about this Halifax team. I'm glass half full, remember?
Good for you. All right, last question, and this is not on the rundown, but I'm throwing it out there anyway. Benedict, I'll turn to you first. What will it take for Forge to knock off CF Montreal of Major League Soccer and reach the Canadian Championship final on Wednesday? What will it take for Forge to do that?
Winning the Battle of the Chouanières. I think David's a big game player. He's proven that in CONCACAF as well as in the CPL sometimes. And I think if they win that battle, he might come up big with a goal and maybe put some pressure on Montreal.
Brilliant answer. And travel safe back from Ottawa, Benedict. Fantastic answer. I love that. And by the way, the Chouanière brothers will be joining us this week on our CanPL Media here this week, talking to our very own Marty Thompson, who I'll go to next. What's it going to take, my friend, for Forge to knock off CF Montreal?
Mobabuli to get lost in the box for about 5 seconds.
Nice.
That'll be enough. He'll do the back heel like he did against Halifax, and then they'll go through.
There you go.
Just watch.
Emily?
Yeah, I'm going to be kind of critical here to rely less on Kyle Becker.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. He has been a big game player for them so often. Charlie, what about you?
Yeah, see, I really want the Kyle Becker revenge game. Have him be all over Montreal. I think really for Forge, they've got to be Forge. I think back to what Bobby Smirniotis said about Canada going into the Azteca and playing football. I think that's what they're going to do against Montreal here. They're not going to park the bus. Absolutely not. They're gonna come out and they're gonna play football, and I'm very excited to see that.
Love that.
I love that too, and that's what I think. Keep the ball down, play your style. I want to see Kwame Awuah, if he's playing, come inside and play midfield. I want to see Alexander Yoshiono-Yonson coming and splitting a back two, and Crutzen playing the ball forward, and Cisse running everywhere, Becker delivering brilliant dead ball set pieces, and play their own style. And then at least if it doesn't go their way, they gave it their best. With all these games coming thick and fast in all these different time zones, I just hope that the fans of Major League Soccer watching this game will see the best of Forge. Yeah. When we watch them and we know they're at their best, as I was talking to a few people in Ottawa this week, then when Forge came in, very complimentary of the way this team is playing in all facets of the game so far and all across different regions. So fingers crossed for that. What a week we've got. And then this time next week, we will once again be recapping massive games in the Canadian Premier League and previewing another Canadian Championship game between an MLS team and a CPL team, as Pacific will this time next week be flying to Toronto to take on TFC in the second match of the Canadian Championship semi-finals. Team, this has been brilliant as always. Great work. And as usual, catch everybody's work on CanPL.ca. All the write-ups and previews will be there to do that as well. Have a good week, everybody. Travel safe home. Benedict, I'll be there with you as well. We'll catch up soon and enjoy the matches. Speak to you soon.